Yeah, we had about 65 people register, so we know that people drop off, but we're super excited about this conversation today.
I just like the question.
What's that?
I like the question,
Mhm.
the poll question.
Oh, is the poll? I don't see a poll question. Does everybody else see it? Maybe because it's my meeting.
Should we get started while we're waiting for people to fill out the poll
Sure.
and get the result?
Okay, well, I'll get started if that's what you're saying.
I think so.
So is the poll up? I'm sorry, I don't see the poll. Okay.
We'll let you know.
Poll is up.
Okay, great. So for everyone that I haven't met, I'm Elizabeth Shea. I run the public relations team at REQ, full service agency. So I'm super excited to have Bob here today. I've known Bob a long time, and I'm actually very honored that you're going to join us today because I heard you speak at a TMA event many, many years ago, and you talked about this topic right when you're getting started with your business. Excuse me. And it really turned the way that I talk to our clients around, and we started asking different questions. And I will say that this is back when I ran a company called Speakerbox. We started asking different questions, and it helped to reframe the messaging and how we went to market. So the reason I think this is important for marketers, I know that there are some customer success people on this call, but the reason I think it's important to marketers is, hence the results from the poll will hopefully demonstrate the answer to that question. Oftentimes we don't talk to customers, or we don't have that access, or if we do have access, we don't potentially have conversations. But in the event you're in the middle of a branding initiative, or you're looking at your go-to-market, or you're looking for case studies, asking the right questions is key. And I really learned that. So at some point it would be good to get a sense, maybe at the end of the conversation, to hear how many people are on the customer success side. Not everybody has a customer success team. So if there isn't, then it's even more the reason to ask the right questions of customers. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to you, Bob. That works. And I'll let you get started. And again, for anyone that's joined recently, if you have a question, please ask in the chat, and then we'll ask you to turn off your mute and ask the question of Bob. We're really hoping that this is going to be conversational and interactive. I think those are the best webinars we have. So I'll let you take it away, Bob.
Thank you. I'm going to actually ask you a question, since I'm known for asking questions. You've mentioned, as we were preparing for this, that during the last event that you did, it came up that sort of this question that I'll talk about, well, who's responsible for understanding the customer's needs and all that? But can you talk about what happened last time that led to this?
Yes, we had a webinar a couple of weeks ago where we had Jeannie Dittrich and Frank Strong and Lisa Throckmorton from the REQ team talk about the trends in marketing and PR. And one of the things that became very apparent during the very interactive webinar, and by the way, that is available if you'd like on YouTube to watch that, was that marketers all too often don't talk to the customers. And that's probably a miss, but potentially could be a miss. So that's something that they were very seriously encouraging. And so as a result, we ended up talking about this program, which had already been scheduled and planned. And again, Bob does this for a living. And so he's donating his time for us so that we can provide this valuable service to our clients and our teammates and our colleagues. So yeah, it's very interesting.
Cool. So thank you, Elizabeth, and both Elizabeths, Elizabeth Ashley for all the hard work and conceiving and putting this together, and Elizabeth Shea for your tireless efforts as a strategic communications advisor to the stars, and for doing things like this for your clients and others. So I highlighted the word. First of all, it's great to be here and nice to see so many great names and folks, some of whom I know. I highlighted the word curiosity here because I think it's important to highlight that curiosity is something we're all born with innately. We crawl around on the floor as infants, and we look for things and we touch things maybe that we shouldn't. Maybe we get a little older and we're curious and we get in trouble by being curious. And I've noticed, and I'm not a behavioral psychologist or an anthropologist, but I do know that the trend is, as you get older, the curiosity dissipates a little bit. Why? Because of these horrible things we all have called responsibilities. It's awful. We have responsibilities and we have less time to be curious. But I would say that curiosity is one of the keys in business that maybe people talk about it all the time, just like, oh, we listen to the customer. It's become a cliche, but being curious is a great tool. And that's what we're going to talk about today. It's a tool to grow the business by understanding your customers better. And the other interesting thing about curiosity is it's absolutely free. You can dial it up for free, or you can dial it down. And as Elizabeth said, I also want to encourage people to use the chat to chat. Put in your thoughts, comments. You have pushback, you have other experiences, observations, anything. I will do my best to keep one eye on it and address things as we go. I do keep things pretty casual, pretty informal, conversational, as Elizabeth said. So that's how we're going to roll today. This is a phrase that I first said a long time ago in a conference room in Sterling, Virginia, when I worked for a company. I was a corporate marketing guy, and we were debating and discussing, 8 of us, and I was one of them. It was almost like the movie 12 Angry Men, where it's the jury. And we were going back and forth, raising our voices and basically talking about how to market a product in Malaysia to millions of Malaysians. How do we get them to buy this thing? And it was, I think I was the person in the room, maybe the only person who was able to sort of step back and say, this is futile. Like we're all here in Sterling, Virginia on the 5th floor of this conference room. And we all probably culturally we're very similar, and sort of socioeconomically, we don't really know anything about these customers in Malaysia. And so I said, hey guys, the answer is not in this room. And I've said it since then as well. I say it to some of my clients when they get too wrapped around, guessing and thinking about what the answer might be. In Sterling, Virginia, on that fateful day, when I said the answer is not in this room, it was not a Hollywood moment where the music came up and people looked at me and, the sun peeked through the clouds and everyone stopped what they were doing and decided to do some more research. It didn't happen that way. Basically, they took 1 second and looked at me. If you've ever seen the movie Jerry Maguire, it's kind of like that. And then they went back to their business, and it shows you how much authority I did or didn't have at the time. But it told me something about myself, because I was curious. And I also thought that curiosity could be used as a way to, much more of a tool or a lever in business. Instead of just doing the same thing we always do, we have to keep one eye open or one ear open and see what the customer's up to, because guess what? Customers change. When the customer that bought our solution may not be the same in a year as the customer who is using us in a year. And we'll talk a little bit about that. And macroeconomics change. So if we don't keep our eyes and ears to the ground with the customer, then we're going to find ourselves debating at conference rooms all over the place, not just in Sterling, Virginia, but everywhere. And so over the time, this is I guess a self-imposed nickname here. I was a marketing guy at the time, and I proceeded to become a marketing strategy consultant. It's called a fractional chief marketing officer. But over time, I moved the megaphone, and I used the megaphone as and I just think of iconically speaking, not that marketing is about shouting at the customer, but creating awareness, communicating clearly, delivering the right message at the right time. It just sort of symbolically, let's call that a megaphone. So for most of my entire career, up until 10 years ago, I had the megaphone to my mouth like this. I was a chief marketing officer for hire. And the evolution came here, where I decided that there was more value, as much or more value, to helping companies understand their customers before we started spending a lot of money on marketing. And strangely, I've researched the GIF using some keywords, and this guy doesn't look too different from me, strangely. I don't know how that happened. And here's the point, and I'm going to say it at least once. What you offer to customers, what you sell to them, what you say to them, what you deliver to them, can only be as compelling as what you already know about them and what you learn from them. It's a huge point. I'm going to say it again. What you offer to customers can only be as compelling as what you learn from them. So why do we spend 95% of our budget and time and resources on the communicating of the message and the development of the message, and a tiny, tiny little rounding error on understanding the customer? And that's my experience. Yours may be different. Maybe your company spends a lot of time in market understanding customers with continuous either surveys or conversations or customer discovery, or really tightening the loop between customer support and customer success and product and marketing and sales. You know, that it's hard to do. But if you look around at companies you admire, companies that are growing, companies that have really nailed it and are continuing to nail it year after year, and companies that have sticky products, if you peel that back, you will find that they are really good at understanding this. They are really good at understanding this.
Bob, can I stop you for a second?
Absolutely.
Did we get the results from the poll?
Good question.
Yes, we did. I think that maybe a bit surprisingly, about 83% of our respondents have chatted with a client within the last week, which I think could be a great indicator that maybe the tides are changing a little bit of who is getting in front of customers and who is not.
That's perfect. So maybe there's that validation is there, and the people that are on the phone, that's why they came to this program.
Right.
So you can probably fast forward through some of the.
Well, you made no, because you made the point earlier, Elizabeth. We have a mix of folks here. If they're all in marketing and they've talked to a customer in the past week, then I will shut down. Like, I'll just, that's awesome. And I would be, no, I'm doing my job. I'm happy. Having said that, I think that the other part of my message is talking with a customer is great. Talking with them to understand, and I'll give you just some quick examples. If we're talking to them to get a case study, that's not what I'm talking about. If we're interviewing them for to speak at our user event, that's not what I'm talking. I'm talking about learning what's going on in the customer's world that has nothing to do with us, right? So just to be clear. Having said that, the poll was accurate. We're going to go with the poll results, and I'm really happy to see those results. So the next, and I'm explaining my journey not to convince you to follow me on my journey, but just I think it's useful for people. It has been useful for people. So 10 years ago, I was a fractional chief marketing officer, meeting with a bunch of CEOs and founders all the time. It was really, I thought it was so cool. And I would talk to them about their business and try to understand their business. And one day I was talking to a chief executive officer who, in his words, we're ready to spend some real marketing dollars, which as a consultant, you're always glad to hear that. But in asking him some questions and hearing his answers, I ended up saying this. Well, it sounds like first we need to find out what's most important to your customers. Why don't I do a customer listening tour? Now, I had never done a customer listening tour before that day. I didn't think in advance that, oh, this is a good prospect to do a customer listening tour, because it wasn't a service I offered. I just took the words out of my brain, and they fell out of my brain. And because what I really meant to say to him was, you're not sure enough about what's going on in your marketplace to know how to market to people in your target audience. And maybe that's not even the right target audience. So the customer listening tour thing popped out of my head, right into my mouth and into his ear. To this CEO's credit, he was a very enlightened, curious, open, authentic person. So he agreed. And that was the beginning of this unbelievable journey. That was 2,700 discovery conversations ago. So I've done this many one-on-one B2B discovery conversations. And as a fractional chief marketing officer, it became my differentiator. So there's a lesson here if you want to talk about differentiation. The lesson being that when I started as a fractional CMO, there weren't a lot of us, there were a few. And you didn't really run into your competition, quote unquote. But over time, because of a lot of factors, macro and microeconomic factors, there are more people who are out there as marketing strategists, either temporarily or permanently. So it was important for me to have a differentiator so that people, when they did talk about me, if they did, they said, oh, that's the guy who helps us listen to our customers first before the marketing. And that turned out to be a huge boon for me. Both, I love doing the work, so it's personal and professional satisfaction, monetary gain because I was doing higher value work, much higher value work, which helped me financially. And I got to work with some really exciting companies that were all curious, just to use that word again, curious. They were curious about what they didn't know. They were curious about what they didn't know. And I love working with curious people. So it all worked out really well. And then the last and most current stage of the journey is here underneath. I now teach teams, companies, how to do this kind of discovery so they can better understand their customers. And I'm having the time of my life doing it. I'm having the time of my life. It is the most kinetic, professionally satisfying thing I think I could ever be doing. So I'm really excited about it. Now, here are the questions. Remember that CEO, when I was talking to him and recommended the listening tour, here's what I asked him. And I want you to think about this right now. You don't have to write it down. I want you to think about it. This is the customer curiosity test, okay? So I want you to think about, why do your customers buy from you? Just one answer. And by the way, if you want to put it in the chat, or if you want to go off mute and contribute your answer, that's absolutely fine too. But for the purposes of getting through the test, I'll just read the questions. So number one, why do your customers buy from you? Why sometimes they don't buy, right? You think there's a great prospect, they're a mustomer, they must be a customer. Nope, they decided not to. Why do customers stay? And of course, if you're in the software business or software as a service, you know that you're not going to make money on a given customer unless they stay for whatever your customer lifecycle payback period is. It might be 1.8 years, it might be 2.7 years, hopefully not too much longer. Why do they stay? By the way, the difference between 1 and 3 changes. If you ask someone why they bought from you, the day they bought, they will give you an answer. Thank you, Katie. Appreciate the comment. If you ask why they bought from you, they're going to play back something that probably came from their decision process, your value proposition, your sales pitch. The fascinating thing is, if you ask them a year later, the value they're getting, they will say something completely different, which speaks to, so they're getting value, but it's just evolved. Why? Because their situation has evolved. Customers are not static. They don't stay the same in terms of their needs. So I want to point out that difference. And then number 4, why do they leave? One thing I hate is the win-loss analysis, where there's a drop down. The data comes from salesforce.com, and there's a drop down. And why did they leave? Cost. Well, that's not really an answer, because it could be that their budgets were completely slashed, but usually, well, there's a reason they didn't fight for it to keep it, right? So why did they leave? Do we really know that? So I'm curious in the chat, if you have another question you think should be part of the basic curiosity test, or something that you like to know or ask, you can put it in there. So this is what I call the customer curiosity test. Now, as you're thinking about this, and as the person, the CEO that I'm talking about, still that story, as he was answering these questions, we had this moment where I could see that he wasn't that confident. I could see that he was answering, he gave answers, but they were lists of things and not one thing, and he wasn't that confident. But he could see that I could tell that he wasn't confident. And because he was very open and curious, at the end was when I brought up the idea of this listening tour, and that's why he signed off on it. He needed help understanding his customer base. So Kathleen Hughes said, what are the gaps that made them seek an alternative service? Perfect. All right, so Kathleen is our first, I'll call her the honorary chief listening officer of the day.
Lisa asked the question too about what keeps your customers up at night.
Oh, I'm sorry, Lisa. I apologize. I'm not scrolling enough. This question about the gaps that made them seek an. So if you look at these as buckets, right, of information, that is a great second level clarifying question. Once they give an answer, is to understand the gaps, right? and the motivators that cause them to either buy or leave. Love it. Love it. Thank you. And great point, Lisa. What keeps you up at night is kind of the classic question that is taught in a lot of discovery. Thank you. Now I fooled you. That wasn't the real test. That wasn't the curiosity test. The real test is this. How do you know that you're right when you answer those questions? How would your customers agree with your answers? Like you're basically answering those questions on the previous slide on behalf of your customers, right? You're saying what they would say. Would the customer agree with you? And then number 3, which is exactly what kind of made the mind meld with that CEO that day. How confident are you? Would you be willing to bet some of your salary that you're right? And that's where we get into the truth of like, I don't know. How do we know? Are we basing it on an NPS survey? Well, that's kind of a lagging indicator. I'm not sure that's really going to give the answer. And then to Elizabeth's point, and I think this is the biggest mystery to me so far in my journey from chief marketing officer to chief listening officer, who is in charge of understanding the customer? At your company, who should it be? Marketing, product management, customer success, the C-suite, everyone, Kathleen says. Okay, well, whose job is it to collect everyone's opinion and data source and kind of bring together that full understanding of the cause? You don't have to answer that. But yeah, I think there is a lot of talk about, the customer experience is not a team or a department. It's a delivery of a concept that everyone has a piece of, right? So I think that's part of the point Kathleen's making. But someone has to aggregate their understanding of who is our customer, why do they buy, why do they leave, what problem are we solving, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I don't see it. I don't see it happening enough. In an ideal world, says John Rice, chief customer officer, at least with what I've seen across some organizations. AppFlyer is a great, are you with AppsFlyer, John?
No, I'm not.
Oh, okay. Are you a customer of theirs?
No, actually, I follow the chief customer officer, Ziv Peled.
I know him.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and so the collaboration in their organization is just, it's unbelievable what his role has kind of evolved into, and how he collaborates with the CEO, and he has a seat at that table with all that cross-functional conversations and things like that.
Well, thanks for contributing that. And I think there are some folks in different organizations who rise up and take that mantle as not only getting the seat at the table, but using it. But John, I'm going to point out Rachel Polanski's comment, which is sort of a counterpoint, which is that we represent, and I don't know, Rachel, if you're marketing or customer success or product, we represent the voice of the customer, but need buy-in from others to help make that voice heard. The voice is heard. So I think that's kind of the reality for many companies. And so CS manager, yeah, well, that makes perfect sense. I would have guessed that. So you could see already how there's different avenues. It's a little tricky to figure out not only the truth about how the customer feels and what they need and why they buy from us, but also whose job it is. But this confidence level is the real test, is once you've gone through the process of thinking about it, how do you know and how confident are you? Because you're betting, in some ways, you're betting the company on how well you understand the customer. You're betting the company on how well you understand the customer. I don't care what stage the company's in. I don't care what size. That's what's at stake, really. And so as I started to become sort of more geeked out on the whole idea of curiosity and listening and doing research, I found some studies that say customers aren't feeling heard and companies who listen do better. So there was sort of what I consider a landmark study by the RAIN Group, which is a sales consulting group. If you ask B2B buyers what influences their purchase decisions the most, discovery is number 1, customer discovery, and listening is number 3 out of 15. So 2 of their top 3 purchase influences come from discovery and listening. But when you ask them how well vendors do on those 2 things, we suck. I'm sorry to use that language. We aren't listening, and we only do a tiny bit of discovery enough to get their agreement to go to the next stage of the process, right? The other thing is there's a great company called Gong, which is a platform that provides insights on recorded sales conversations and customer success and other customer facing conversations. They studied 1 million calls and they found out that the top performing reps in B2B talk less than half the time versus the bottom who talk nearly 3/4 of the time. The numbers here are that the top is something like 20%. So 80% of them are talking most of the time. And if you're a customer, I mean, I'll just ask you, what you've been, if you've ever bought software, if you've ever bought a product or service, if you've ever, been in a wedding and had someone come pitch you on their catering service, they're not really good at listening. They're good at maybe presenting and going through their assets. And here's how great we are. Here's how many locations. Here's how great our people are. We had all the windows replaced in our house and it took forever to get through the sales pitch. And, I get that's how people are trained, but customers don't feel heard. They do not feel heard. So another couple questions for you to ponder while we're here. Why did Starbucks CEO do a lengthy stint as a barista? And why did Uber CEO similarly become a driver? And he took a ton of shifts as a driver. I want you guys to answer this one. Why? It's maybe obvious, maybe not. Why did they do this? Why did particularly the CEO? Why did the CEO of each company do this? To get an on the ground look? Yes, 100%. There's more. Any other thoughts? No better way to understand the customer facing experience than to live it in real life so they can talk the talk and walk the walk. Rachel, John, Kathleen, we have the same 3 folks contributing. I love it. To truly understand the customer experience, that's true. Silviana, I love that name. To meet the customers. Yep. Opportunity to be closer to customers. So you got, so the classic answer, you guys have nailed it. Katie said process improvement. Interesting. I like that. This is the classic answer: to walk in the customer's shoes. Here's the question. Did they just do it because they're curious to walk in the customer's shoes? Or are they worried, extremely worried that their team doesn't understand? Think about how much effort it takes and how expensive it is for a CEO to decide, I need to go sample the customer experience on a regular basis. I need to go do that. The only reason they would decide to do it and trade off, I'm going to do that instead of talking to investors. I'm going to do it instead of talking to, giving an all hands meeting. Yes, Katie points out, important to understand the employee experience. That's exactly right. In case of Uber and Starbucks, that's actually a great point. But my main point here is this at the bottom. They feel like no one owns the customer and no one owns the experience and no one understands what it's really like to be a customer, and they have to do it themselves. Yes, Undercover CEO is an amazing show on YouTube. So that's kind of the let's just say it's a problem, but it's an opportunity for those of us who feel like our company is doing a good job but could be doing better. You could suggest what happened with Uber is that their head of driver experience wrote a very, very authentic, intense email to the CEOs saying, I've been banging my head against a wall to get resources for our driver facing app. And I wish someone in that group would see what it's like to be a driver. And the CEO said, I'll do it. So that's exactly what happens. That's exactly.
I'm interrupting.
No, please chime in.
What I like about this is this also signals that it does need to start at the top.
That's right.
From a standpoint of oftentimes the CEO doesn't take that type of, doesn't make that type of investment. So I think that's awesome.
Well, Elizabeth, that's such a great point. And I've heard that before, that people in software companies that have customer success teams is, we don't have enough influence as a customer success team. And a lot of times it comes down to how the CEO sets the tone, the culture, the prioritization, and everyone's busy. I don't think they're doing it to be mean, to be dismissive. But Elizabeth, I think you're right. And there are, I've had the privilege of working with companies where the leadership stemming from the CEO, founder, is just intensely curious and intensely empathetic about what it's like to be the customer. That goes back to the phrase, hey, you have to be willing to stand up and say, guys, the answer isn't in this room. We have to get out of this room to get the real answer, the truth, right? And if the CEO said that, it would be very powerful. So that's a great point. The last example I'm going to share, or it's an anecdote. This is on behalf of Churn Zero, which is a great company that many of us know that has software to manage customer success teams and customers. And they do a phenomenal job. They told this story at their conference last year, and I was privileged to be there. And also I spoke, but I was listening to this and I couldn't believe it. Like, this guy started an app that helps barbershops, like, talk about old school, that helps barbershops organize their back office and their reservations and a bunch of other stuff. And they were having trouble getting barbershops to buy, because every time they tried to sell them something, the person at the barbershop would say, hold on, there's someone coming in the door, I have an appointment, or someone's calling on my other line to make an appointment, which was the problem they're trying to solve. One day, they had been working with one big customer to get their requirements and to really rebuild the software. And that customer ended up in financial difficulty and was going to close down. This guy, this CEO, David, said, instead of letting that customer go out of business, because we're getting such good knowledge for them and from them and revenue, we're going to approach the funding behind that company and see if they'll sell it to us. And he bought it. He bought their biggest customer. I mean, it's just the most amazing story. And I'm sure you could find it on YouTube somewhere where he's talking about this. They did it so they could understand what it's like to run a barbershop, which is who their customers are. So I'm going to say, going back to the Starbucks CEO and this guy, these are examples of extreme curiosity out of need, out of a desperate need. We're not growing. Why? Well, we've tried everything else. Have we talked to our customers? No, I guess not. So this is extreme, intense, to Elizabeth's point, top-down curiosity driven by the people in charge. And I encourage you to look up this story, Squire Barbershop. It's just such a great story. But you don't have to have extreme curiosity and have those kind of unbelievable situations. I'm going to give you some tools today and methods and a framework for how to think about this that you can take depending on what department you're in. Like, you can see here these use cases, but the approach is called radically authentic discovery. And it's basically a set of customer discovery and listening techniques and tools. So there's questions that I'm going to show you that you can start using the next time you meet with a customer, today, tomorrow, well, not tomorrow, but Monday. And it also includes listening techniques and other tips and hacks. But the gist of it, it's to help B2B companies have more open-ended, strategic, curious conversations with customers that result in, and it happens all the time in the work that I do, because I teach this methodology, they get in customer engagement like they've never seen before. Customers lean in and share. From that, they get insights, and from those insights become new revenue opportunities. So you could use this kind of strategic conversation technique to find product market fit, to do ideal customer profile research, to do win-loss analysis, churn interviews, customer discovery, which would be in a sales call, or even in customer success, which is where I operate a lot, is you're meeting with a customer in a quarterly business review, and you take a step back and say, we want to tell you how you're doing with adoption of our product, but we also want to ask what's going on in your business, what's changed, what's new, what's difficult. And then my favorite is the customer listening tour, because that's kind of where it all started. A customer listening tour is simply an initiative to go out and talk to and with, not at, don't sell them and pitch them. You go out and have open-ended conversations to let customers talk about what's most important to them. So radically authentic discovery is the name of the method. I also call it RAD. And this is, I'm going to give you a glimpse inside of it right now. So there are four main components, and then I'm going to dive into the disruptive questions real quick. So opening your aperture, what that means is this. Customers, we think they're customers. but they're not customers, because that simply is defining them by what they bought from us. And they are much, much more than that. They have a job to do. Our solution maybe helps them do that job, sort of contributes in 10%, 20% of their job relates to our solution. And then the only reason they have a job is because their company thinks that job is important to contribute to the company's priorities. So the aperture refers to the size of a camera lens. Opening it up lets in more light, to understand not just the person you're talking to and what they think, but understand what they're dealing with. What are they dealing with? They're trying to feel good about their job. They're trying to do a good job. Maybe they want to get a bonus. Maybe they want to get a pat on the back. Maybe they want to get promoted. But they have a team, an organization that they're part of. What is that group trying to accomplish? Right? And then why? What does the company expect from that group? If you approach them simply by asking them what they think of your product, you're missing 90% of the insights. It's important, but that's 90% is what you're missing. You want to find out all the things behind, because that tells you why they need your product and why they might leave or might not leave. And Elizabeth, Shea, feel free to jump in with questions or comments.
No, I mean, this is what really got me last time, was that just weren't potentially asking the right questions. And so I remember one case where I thought that market knowledge was really important, and the fact that we really knew his industry. He said, "Oh no, that's not important. What's important is that you got up to speed quickly." And that turned into a rapid time to value. I mean, he helped us coin that term. And that's a perfect example of that, where, oh, so I don't care if you know my business as well as I do. I don't expect you to. So it's just an anecdote that makes me think about this. And I haven't heard this in a while, so I'm loving this.
Well, I wish we had 20 minutes just to talk about your experience, because I think what you just said,
talk about that later.
It's very easy in that proverbial conference room in Sterling, Virginia, to think, well, what are we good at? What are we and obviously you did the right thing. You didn't just think about it in the conference room. You went out and asked customers. But it's very easy to say, well, we get to know their business and their market. That there's nothing wrong. It doesn't sound wrong. But when you ask, when that kind of value proposition hits the light of day with a customer, and they say, that actually has nothing to do with it. It's really this.
Like, we switched agencies and I have to prove to the CEO that I made the right choice.
Right.
So, anyway.
Excellent. So the piece that we'll get back to and dive into in a moment are what I call these disruptive questions. The questions that I started asking as part of this many, many hundreds of discovery conversations, I started to realize that if you ask questions that they've heard a million times that sound like vendor questions, that they sort of lean back and they just feel like they're not doing anything interesting, and you don't get much out of them. So I ended up formulating questions that you'll see in a moment that became, they wake up a different part of the customer's brain, because the way the question is worded, you're asking about the customer. You're asking about real things that happen in the customer's world. You're giving them a scenario instead of saying, what do you need our product to do? Like, that's not really their job to tell you what the product should do. They have a solution. They don't have a solution in mind. They have a problem in mind, right? And a challenge that needs to be solved. So we'll get back to that. And the other two parts are this other little thing that I coined, STFU, which doesn't stand for anything naughty. It's silence till you fully understand, which is just another way of saying, just shut up. When the customer is talking, just try and listen and understand. Don't be afraid of a little bit of a pause in the conversation. Don't jump in. And I have a whole section of my content is based on how to help you slow your brain down a little bit and stick with what the customer is saying, go to the next level to understand why they're saying that. The most important thing is getting them to talk about what's most important to them. And I'll share a quick anecdote. One of the folks that I trained a team of customer success and account managers, and they went out and they're supposed to come back and tell us how it went. Tell the team, how did it go when you ask these questions and use these listening techniques? And this one person said, she was all ready to, ask these disruptive questions and listen as part of a presentation she was doing on site with the customer in another city. Unfortunately, right when she started, she opened her laptop, connected it to the screen, and the fire alarm went off. They had to evacuate. They ended up at a restaurant. The customer suggested a restaurant. And she said to me afterwards, it just didn't feel right. It would have felt weird to open the laptop there and to start going through slides about us and, how they're doing and everything. So she said the most weird thing happened. It was amazing. We just talked. We had a conversation. We talked openly. I learned more in the 30 minutes in the restaurant than I had ever learned in 2 years of working with them about them. I learned more about them. And at the end, the best part was the customer said, this was great. We should do this again. We should do this again. And she said, why? He said, let's just say her name was Mary, the account manager. Because Mary, this is the first vendor conversation I've ever had in my career where we got to talk about what was most important to us. The first time we've ever gotten to talk about what's most important to us. We are so busy driving our agenda home, getting through that agenda. We're not leaving any energy or space for the customer to, if we have just simply, even if the one question was like, what's going on with you right now? What's the most important thing to you? Even that would be a huge step in the right direction. Then once you've taken this sort of open aperture approach, ask the disruptive questions, listen, then you can connect the dots. What is their company trying to accomplish? What is the customer's job towards accomplishing the company goal? And what does your solution do? This, I think I said before, the stickiest companies in the world do a great job of lining up the value that they deliver with something that's really important to the company. Because that way, if your customer leaves or gets promoted or gets laid off, unfortunately, then you don't end up having to convince the entire company again of your value proposition because you've already shown that you're accomplishing something important to the company, almost at the board level. And when I say board level, that's what we're going to talk about now. I'm going to give you the 3 disruptive questions that I want to share with you today. You can screenshot it. I think you'll be able to look at the video or screenshot it. And I'm happy to share the slides afterwards. Or as Elizabeth Ashley has shown here, there's a ton of stuff on my website that basically I give away a lot of this for free. So this inverted trapezoid, if you will, or whatever this is, I failed geometry. It looks like this for a reason, because you start big, you're asking about their business, then you narrow it down to, okay, now what about your job? What's important to you? What's hard? And then you kind of get to the point where once you've warmed them up and they realize you're not there just to talk about your product and ask for opinions about, feedback, then by this point, you can ask about their experience with your solution and you'll get very candid answers. Here's the first question. I ask this at the beginning of every discovery conversation, and I coach people to do the same. So, and I'll say it how I ask it. It's kind of conversational. So let me ask you this. If I could sneak in, this is a 30,000 foot question. If I could sneak into your next board meeting or maybe your executive leadership meeting, what do you think is the top priority or challenge that I'd hear them talking about? So we are and I don't care if it's an office manager, system administrator, sales director, CEO, CFO, this is the question. And the reason you're asking this and the result is twofold. One is, as I said before, you could get an insight that either you can directly or indirectly tie your value proposition to. And that's incredibly important, because if you find out that their main goal is X, and in order to do that, the most important initiative is Y, and you are an important part of that initiative or the supporting initiative, you can pretty much forecast that customer is going to stay. The other reason is it is so disarming to the customer in the conversation to feel like, wow, that is so not a vendor question. Like, that's not a normal question. And that's good, because this person who's asking me this clearly put thought into the question. They're really interested. They're really interested and authentically curious. So that's an example of a question, but it's the first one. And people might say, oh, my customer's not going to know anything about the board meeting. It's not about that. It's about their interpretation of what the mission is, what the priorities are. Next. So what's the one thing that absolutely has to be off your whiteboard in the next 90 days? This is a way to understand what's important in their job. Now, depending on your company and your solution, you could say 30 days, you could say 6 months. It's up to you. You could say this year. The whiteboard, whether they actually have a physical whiteboard or not, the key here is that you're asking them for what is the difference between what your world looks like today and what it needs to look like in 90 days. It could be something that your solution can help accomplish, or it could be something that you have the expertise to help them accomplish, even if it's not a feature of your product. It could be something that allows you to empathize. One guy said to me, he answered the question. He was a director of customer support for an online jewelry brand, big B2C, internet only jewelry brand. And he said, I have to hire 1,000 support people in the Philippines in 30 days because that's where our customer team is based. And so it allows you to understand, like, wow, before I ask that guy for something I need, I'm going to understand how busy he is for the next 30 days. Or at least if I ask him something, I'm going to say, I hope it's going well. I hope that hiring is going well. That's crazy. The next one, and the last one I'm going to share today, is probably the boldest and most disruptive, because we're all taught to avoid asking about competitors. So let's say you got a call from our competitor. This is you asking a customer. If you got a call from our competitor tomorrow, you got an email or a call, how would you react? Let's say on a scale of 1 to 5. 1 is you'd pretty much ignore, 5 is you'd respond. Now, to those who say, I don't want to bring up the topic of competitors, it's not about that. They don't talk about competition. What they're doing is, this is a way to access their brain so that they talk about their relationship with you. How do they feel about you? What do I mean by this? So if they say 5, they would respond to a competitor pretty quickly. Don't freak out. If you ask this question, they say 5, just simply say, oh, thanks for being candid, because you always want to kind of reward the behavior that you want, which is they're transparent, they're candid, they're curious as well. Thanks for being so candid. That's really helpful. That's exactly the kind of information that helps us. Why'd you say 5? And right, that Elizabeth said, I'd rather know than not know. Absolutely, 100%.
You're on a roll. I didn't want to interrupt, but
no. So,
I love that question, because it's not saying like, what do you think about us, and would you switch?
Exactly.
It's yeah. I love that question.
Exactly, and I'm going to explain that in a minute too. But if they say 5, you should never assume that it's a negative, because ask them, why did you say 5? The vast majority of the time, the typical answer is something like this. Well, we're not looking around, but I have a fiduciary responsibility to my company to make sure we're spending money the right way, to be aware of what other ways there are to solve things. And we don't know where we're going to learn something. So if your competitor reaches out, they have a really good webinar coming up, like this. If they have a piece of content that's really instructional, if they're having an event that they invite us to, and we think we can learn, like, we're not interested in them marketing to us. We're interested in them, in learning from them, because we're just one company using your solution. We have no idea what else is out there, what are the best practices, etc. So sometimes, yes, it could be a negative, right? You may find out like, whoa, I'm really surprised that they're thinking of leaving, right? But you'd rather know than not know, to Elizabeth's point. But think of it that again, just getting them to talk, because you asked, the other thing they say most frequently is, yeah, I got a call last week from a competitor, or I get calls every day in some cases, right? They get pitched all the time. All you're doing is using the word competitor as a hook to let them know you can relate to their world. Now, I do want to, before I jump to anything else, I think it's Ella asks the question, have you ever had a customer balk at a disruptive question? What are your tips for effectively handling customers who may not be as open to these types of questions? Well, the first part of your question, have I ever had a customer balk? I'm going to say that the answer to that is no, I've never had. And I've never had an experience where one of the folks that I've taught has come back and said, and they would tell me. I've had one situation that I'll describe to you. And I'm going to just say this. You have to prep the conversation in the right way. You have to set it up by saying something like, is it okay if we take a step back? I'd like to ask some bigger questions about your business. I would love to understand a little bit more, just strategically, why this is important to you. If you ask that first and say that first, you'll have no problem. But if you have a list of questions that sound typical, and then you say, by the way, if you ever got a call from a competitor, yeah, they might flinch a little bit, but I've never had a customer not answer. The one situation I got hired to do an engagement where one of the customers I interviewed, my client's customer, was the CFO of a very well-known hedge fund. So I was actually a little nervous to begin with because they're notoriously bottom line and busy and all that. So it's fine. First question. Hey, if I could sneak into your next board meeting, he said, hold on. He said, and I had just told him what I was trying to accomplish with this sort of big picture conversation. He said, I don't have time for this. And I said, because I'm curious. Oh, I'm sorry. What do you mean? He said, I thought this was just a regular old vendor satisfaction call, which I took as a compliment. And this isn't that. You're actually asking me good questions where I have to think. And I can't do that right now. I don't have time for that kind of thought process. So I said, I understand. And we got off the phone, and I immediately, in a panic, let my client know. And they said, don't worry, he's like that all the time. But that's the only thing you might run into. But and I appreciate you're asking a kind of a bold question. Has a customer ever balked? Yeah, it's a really good question, Ella. And I would say no. I would say this. Whenever, and understand, I say this with love and peace. If you are asking that question, whether customers balk, I think what it says sometimes is that there's hesitation on the part of us, the vendor, to ask different types of questions that are more penetrating and more ambitious. Customers love these questions. Customers love these questions. They talk 85% of the call, 80 to 85%, because you're asking the board meeting, the leadership meeting, the whiteboard, the competitor. These are things that happen in their life every day. We were just kind of trained to avoid some of those things, and we shouldn't have been. I'm trying to undo some of that. So I hope that's helpful, Ella. And by the way, for anybody, if anyone has any comments or follow-ups that they want to share, I'm on LinkedIn and I'm on it a lot. So I'm happy to answer questions there. And don't hesitate if you have a question, even if you think the question is sort of like either obvious or crazy, please ask.
And Bob, I have to do the 6-minute.
Yes.
Oh, perfect. Okay. I don't know.
Well, let's do this.
Okay.
Oh, Kathleen has a question. Is it because it's more at this point, your questions are more important than my content. So let me go here. Kathleen said, is it okay to ask this from a customer that is pushing back? So I know you sound satisfied with your other vendor. For my edification, what does their CSM or company deliver that can help me better? Yeah, if I understand your question, so
we can let Kathleen come on off mute if you want.
Yeah, because I might need some clarification. So here's what I think I'm hearing. If they say they're talking to other competitors, the follow-up I almost always ask is, or even if, no matter what number they give, sorry, I almost always say, is there something that would definitely get your attention from a competitor standpoint in their outreach? That's something that would just be like, whoa, that sounds really compelling, or that sounds really cheap, or that addresses a need that we have that's not currently being addressed. So I always ask that. And I guess I should have mentioned it already, but I didn't. But that is where some of the most significant learning comes from. Because if someone says, yeah, we just don't, we're curious about having an international footprint, and I don't think you guys have that today. And oh, we do. So there's an opportunity. Or it gives you so many content ideas of what are the gaps in the customer's mind of things that will help them do their job better, that a competitor might be offering from an information standpoint, but you are not. So I hope I answered the question, Kathleen. If not, please let me know.
No, you absolutely did. And it was more of there are times when maybe you're not bringing up the pain points for them. And if you ask that question and they say, oh, well, so-and-so offers this, it kind of just taps into your brain. Oh, okay, we offer this as well.
Right.
Boom, boom, boom. Sets up the dialogue.
That's a great point. And I should have said also that the other frequent answer is, hey, Bob, if we do talk to your customer's competitor, your client's competitor, we're very likely to come back and say, here's what they're offering, and we'd like you to build this, or why don't you offer this, or when are you going to offer it? And so they're not eager to break the relationship with you.
Right.
They are eager to get the most possible value out of it. So I know we're short on time. I'm happy to stop with the content's basically done. what I want to do though is address questions or comments, either from you, Elizabeth, or the team, or anybody on the call. Any questions?
I think this was super informative. Do you have a video that you wanted to show though?
Yeah, yes, I
Or
do.
is it long?
No, it's
Oh.
not long. It's a firsthand story from a CEO that I had the privilege of working with. So I'll play it real quick.
Okay.
In order
We
to
can
work
ask
on the
questions.
messaging, in order to work on the roadmap, you personally, as co-CEO, co-founder, did a lot of customer calls, one-on-one. Let's call it customer rediscovery. That's what I call it, because it wasn't customer discovery in the classic sense. You have to go talk to a bunch of companies or prospects before you build the product. You guys are already in market. You have a bunch of customers. So you did these one-on-one calls. You didn't just look at data, quantitative data. You didn't just look at research reports. You wanted to have the calls yourself personally. Why was that so important to you?
Working backwards from the customer is proven time and time again to be the right way to build something. So you got to start there. You got to start with the customer problems. And I'm a big data person. If the data is available, I want to use it, but I'm also aware of the limitations of data, and it's not always available. And even if you have some data, it doesn't mean that that's going to give you all the answers, because it might not be a comprehensive data set. And then research reports, you know, if you know something about an industry and then you go read a research report that some researcher wrote about it, you very quickly realize that it's almost useless.
Strong statement that I don't disagree with.
Yeah. So, you know, you got to do your own research, and then you get to ask your own questions, and you're engaging with the customer. And then as you start building the product or making the changes, you can go back to those same people and say, okay, we talked about this. What do you think of this idea? And so just starting that process, it was important for us to start with the.
Very good. I should have pointed out, you also didn't delegate it to someone in the organization. The other thing we should point out is that you're chief product officer in the company.
We actually have, you know, we have customer success, we have product manager, we have sales. Sure. And so we have a lot of people talking to customers about different things, but they have their own kind of mission for what they're doing. And so this was a way to have a separate discussion with customers that was around roadmap stuff that our other folks weren't having. You want, as the CEO, co-founder, co-CEO, to have direct dialogue with your customers. And I think this is a great way to do it. And then as a product leader, so if you have a lot of products and you have product managers managing those products, I think it's okay for them to go and do this work. But most startups, one of the founders is leading up the product.
So that is, in order to work on, this is an example of people that I had the privilege of working with, so curious, so open and authentic. And I should point out that not because of this customer listening tour he did, but they went from a nice little company that was growing to raising $11 million and now sort of on the rocket ship based on the roadmap that they developed. Some good books here. It helped me professionally, but also personally, if that kind of thing is important to you. And I just want to say thanks, everybody. Thank you again, REQ, both Elizabeths. Thank you, audience, for chiming in so much and engaging. And I always enjoy these things, and I love talking about this stuff. So hit me up on LinkedIn, and we can chat more if you want.
This was excellent. Thank you so much, Bob. Lots of comments coming in the chat. So appreciate it. We will be distributing this over a YouTube recording for anyone that wants to send it along to folks that might not have made it at your company. So hopefully we will see you at the next webinar that we have.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay, thanks.